The castle of Blackthorn stood tall against the night sky, its stone walls holding centuries of power and pride. Inside, the halls were cold, lit only by torches that flickered against ancient banners. It was in these halls that Alara Voss had spent the last 3 years of her life, moving quietly, speaking rarely, and trying her best to remain unseen. She was a servant now, though her family had once held a respected place within the pack. That had changed the day her father was accused of disloyalty to the Alpha Line, a crime he always denied but could never disprove. Since then, the Voss name had been stripped of honor, and Alara had learned to survive by staying small, staying silent, and staying out of the way of the one man who seemed to despise her most, Alpha King Draven Ashford. Draven ruled Blackthorn with a strength that bordered on cruelty. He was tall, broad-shouldered, and carried himself like a man who trusted no one. His eyes were sharp, his voice commanding, and his patience was thin, especially when it came to servants who made mistakes. Alara had learned early on that even the smallest error, an overfilled cup, a late meal, a door left open a moment too long, could earn her a look of disgust that cut deeper than words ever could. "You are careless," he told her once, after she had accidentally spilled wine near his boots. "I do not know why my staff continues to employ someone so incompetent." She had said nothing that day, only bowed her head and cleaned the mess in silence. It was easier that way, easier to let him believe she was nothing more than a clumsy, forgettable servant girl. What he did not know, what no one in the castle knew, was that Alara carried a secret buried deep within her, one she had hidden since childhood. She was not powerless. Her wolf, a creature she called Nyx, had been asleep for years, locked away by Alara's own will. Her mother had warned her long ago, before she passed, that revealing her true strength would make her a target. "There are those who fear what our bloodline carries," her mother had said, voice trembling with a worry Alara never fully understood. "Promise me you will hide it, Alara. Promise me you will stay safe." And so she had. She buried her strength beneath years of quiet obedience, becoming the invisible girl who mopped floors and carried trays, who flinched at raised voices and avoided eye contact with the king who barely remembered her name. But some things cannot stay hidden forever. It began with whispers, small conversations overheard in corridors, words exchanged too quickly between guards who thought no one was listening. Alara, moving silently as she always did, caught fragments of a conversation one evening near the kitchen halls. "The ceremony," one guard muttered. "That is when they plan to strike." "Are you certain the king does not know?" the other asked. "No one else does. Not yet." Alara froze behind a stone pillar, her heart pounding. She strained to hear more, but the guards moved on before she could catch anything further. Still, the fear in their voices was unmistakable. Something dangerous was coming, and it seemed to be aimed directly at the Alpha King. She spent the next 2 days trying to piece together what she had heard. She noticed strange faces around the castle, visitors from a neighboring pack who smiled too widely and watched too closely. She noticed one guard in particular, a man named Corwin, who seemed unusually nervous whenever the topic of the coming blood moon ceremony was mentioned. Alara tried to speak to the head of the guard about what she had heard, but the man only laughed at her, waving her off as though her words were nothing more than the nervous ramblings of a servant girl. "You expect me to believe there's a plot against the king based on rumors you overheard while sweeping floors?" he said, shaking his head. "Get back to your duties." She tried once more, catching a lower-ranking guard near the training yard, but he too dismissed her, telling her that servants had no place worrying about matters beyond their station. No one would listen. No one ever did. As the night of the blood moon ceremony approached, Alara's worry grew heavier with each passing hour. She wandered through her duties in a haze, unable to shake the feeling that something terrible was about to happen, and that she was the only one who sensed it. The ceremony itself was grand, more magnificent than anything Alara had witnessed in her years serving the castle. The great hall was filled with pack members, dressed in their finest, silver and gold decorations hanging from the walls, and a large fire burning at the center of the room in honor of the blood moon above. Draven stood near the front, dressed in a deep crimson robe that marked his position as Alpha King, greeting guests and accepting the respect owed to him. Alara moved through the crowd, carrying trays of food and drink, her eyes scanning the room out of habit. searching for anything unusual. She noticed a man near the far end of the hall, dressed as a visiting dignitary from a neighboring pack, someone she had not seen before. He stood a little too still, watched the king a little too closely, and kept one hand tucked inside his coat, in a way that made her stomach tighten with unease. She tried to move closer, tried to warn one of the guards standing near the entrance, but the ceremony had drawn a crowd so thick that she could barely push through. Panic began to rise within her chest as she watched the stranger step forward, slowly making his way toward the king, under the pretense of offering a formal greeting. "Please," she whispered to herself, desperation clawing at her throat. "Someone, please notice." But no one did. The stranger reached the king just as Draven turned to address a nearby lord. In one swift motion, the man's hand emerged from his coat, revealing a blade coated in a strange, dark substance. Elara recognized it instantly: wolfsbane, a poison deadly enough to weaken even the strongest of wolves. Time seemed to slow as the blade arced toward Draven's side. Something inside Elara broke free. All the years of suppression, all the control she had forced upon herself, shattered in an instant. Nyx surged forward with a power Elara had long forgotten she possessed. Her body transformed in the space of a heartbeat, fur the color of moonlight bursting across her skin, ancient markings glowing faintly along her sides, markings that had not been seen within the Blackthorn pack for generations. She moved faster than anyone in the hall could track, crossing the distance between herself and the king in the blink of an eye. She threw herself between Draven and the blade just as it descended, taking the wound meant for him across her side. Pain exploded through her body, sharp and burning, but she did not stop. With a speed born of desperation and instinct, she knocked the assassin backward, pinning him to the ground before the surrounding guards even understood what had happened. The hall erupted into chaos. Guards rushed forward, finally seizing the attacker as gasps and cries spread through the crowd. But Elara barely registered any of it. The wolfsbane burned through her veins like fire, and her vision began to blur at the edges. She felt herself falling before strong arms caught her. "No!" Draven's voice cut through the haze, sharper and more desperate than she had ever heard it. "No, stay with me." Elara looked up into the eyes of the man who had spent years looking through her as though she did not exist. Now, for the first time, he was looking directly at her, really looking, his expression twisted with something she had never seen from him before: fear. Not for himself, but for her. "You," he whispered, his voice breaking slightly, as recognition dawned on him. "The markings, the bloodline. You are..." "Voss," she managed to whisper, the word barely escaping her lips before darkness began pulling at the edges of her mind. "My family were Voss." Draven's eyes widened as pieces began falling into place. Memories of old stories his father once told him, about a bloodline that had stood beside the Ashford line generations ago, before betrayal tore the two families apart. He had never imagined that bloodline still existed, let alone that it had been living quietly within his own castle walls, serving him without recognition or respect for years. "Someone get the healers," Draven shouted, lifting Elara into his arms without hesitation. "Now." The castle halls blurred past as Draven carried her personally to the healing chambers, refusing to let anyone else take her from his arms. The healers worked quickly, using ancient remedies passed down through generations to counter the effects of wolfsbane poisoning. Draven remained by her side throughout the entire process, something no one in the castle had ever witnessed from their king. Hours passed in tense silence, as Elara's body fought against the poison coursing through her veins. Draven sat beside her bed, his usual composure completely abandoned, replaced by a raw worry that surprised even himself. He thought of every harsh word he had ever spoken to her, every dismissive glance, every moment he had failed to see who she truly was. He had called her careless, he had called her incompetent, and yet she had thrown herself into the path of death without a moment's hesitation, simply to protect a man who had shown her nothing but contempt. When Elara finally stirred, her eyes fluttering open weakly, Draven felt something shift within his chest, a feeling he could not name, but could no longer ignore. "You saved my life," he said quietly, his voice rough with emotion he rarely allowed himself to show. "After everything I have said to you, everything I have done, You still chose to save me. Ilara managed a small, tired smile. You are my king, she whispered. Whether you see me or not, protecting you is my duty. No, Draven said firmly, shaking his head. It was never your duty to sacrifice yourself for someone who treated you so poorly. I misjudged you, Ilara. I misjudged you completely. For the first time since she had known him, Draven knelt beside her bed, lowering himself to her level, in a gesture that stunned everyone present. An Alpha King did not kneel, not for lords, not for warriors, and certainly not for servants. Yet here he was, kneeling beside the woman he had once dismissed as insignificant, humbled by the truth of her courage and sacrifice. I am sorry, he said simply, for every unkind word, for every moment I failed to see your worth. You have shown more strength and loyalty than anyone within these walls, and I did not deserve it. Ilara's eyes filled with quiet emotion as she listened to words she never expected to hear from him. For years, she had accepted his coldness as something she deserved, a consequence of her family's disgrace. But now, seeing the vulnerability in his expression, she realized that perhaps neither of them had truly understood the other. Over the following days, as Ilara recovered under the careful watch of the castle healers, Draven visited her chamber often, something that sent quiet whispers through the halls of Blackthorn. He learned more about her, about the years she had spent hiding her strength out of fear, about the mother who had died protecting that secret, about the quiet loneliness she had carried for so long without complaint. In turn, Ilara began to see a side of Draven few others were allowed to witness. Beneath the harsh exterior he presented to his pack was a man burdened by the weight of leadership, someone who had built walls around himself to survive the pressures of his position. Her sacrifice had cracked those walls, revealing a man capable of gratitude, humility, and something that felt dangerously close to affection. The assassin, once questioned, revealed the truth behind the attack, a rival pack seeking to seize Blackthorn's territory by eliminating its king during a moment of vulnerability. With the threat exposed and dealt with, peace slowly returned to the castle, though nothing within its walls felt quite the same as before. Ilara was no longer treated as an invisible servant. Word of her bloodline and her bravery spread quickly, earning her a newfound respect among the pack members who had once overlooked her. But more than the recognition from others, it was the change in Draven that meant the most to her. He no longer looked through her. He looked at her, truly looked, with eyes that held warmth where cold indifference once lived. One evening, as the sun set over Blackthorn's territory, painting the sky in soft shades of orange and gold, Draven found her sitting quietly near the castle gardens, the same gardens she used to tend in silence, unnoticed by anyone who passed. You once told me protecting me was your duty, he said, taking a seat beside her. I would like to ask you something, not as your king, but simply as Draven. Ilara turned to face him, curiosity flickering in her tired but healing eyes. Would you allow me the chance to know you, not as a servant, not as someone bound by duty, but as Ilara Voss, the woman who saved my life without asking for anything in return? For a long moment, Ilara said nothing, searching his face for any trace of the coldness that once defined him. She found none, only sincerity, humility, and something gentle she had never expected to see directed toward her. I would like that, she finally said, a small, genuine smile breaking across her face. As they sat together beneath the fading light, something unspoken passed between them, a quiet understanding that whatever indifference had once existed was now replaced by respect, gratitude, and the beginning of something neither of them had expected to find. Ilara knew, in that moment, that her years of hiding, of silence, and of sacrifice had not been in vain. She had saved a king who once hated her, and in doing so, had found something far greater than recognition. She had found a chance to finally be seen,